Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Learn webinar, The Impact of AI on Teaching and Learning, Crafting Future-Ready Policy. My name is Jeannie Haubert. I am the Executive Director here at Learn. Learn's professional development offerings are tailored specifically to education leaders, and we aim to help members navigate current challenges in their professional life through a network of education partners. We strongly encourage you to sign up if you haven't already for our quarterly newsletter to stay up to date with the latest Learn webinars, podcasts, and research insights. Simply go to www.golearntoday.org and click the Join tab to plug into our network. Our resources are always free for educators. Wanted to begin by extending a warm welcome to our esteemed panelists for today. I'll begin with Dr. Marshall Jones. So Marshall Jones is from Winthrop University. He's a professor of learning design and technology program, and he currently holds the Singleton Endowed Professorship in Education at Winthrop. He's published more than 70 papers and book chapters in various outlets and given over 100 presentations at national and international meetings, so this will be a breeze. He has research interests that include the diffusion and adoption of technological innovations, emerging technologies, and their impact on learning. His most recent work is focused on AI for teaching and learning. Next, Dr. Chuck Hodges is a professor of instructional technology at Georgia Southern University, where his students are mostly K through 12 teachers in Georgia working towards graduate degrees. His research involves online teaching and learning and technology-rich environments. He's currently also a faculty expert for AAC&U Institute on AI, Pedagogy, and Curriculum. And last, but certainly not least, Dr. Stephanie Moore is from the University of New Mexico. Dr. Moore is an associate professor of organization, information, and learning sciences at the University of New Mexico. She's also presently editor-in-chief of a top-ranked educational research journal, the Journal of Computing in Higher Education. She also serves as the vice president of the Open Technology and Education Society and Scholarship Association. And she specializes in educational innovation and change, ethics and technology, including generative AI, and ethics, among other areas of expertise. It's a long list. Guys, welcome, and I'm so glad to have you here. Thank you for making time.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So we can begin by just talking about kind of big picture, the overall perception of AI in the education world. And I want to kind of juxtapose that to perceptions in, say, the business world, for example. So it feels to me kind of like there's this tug of war that is going on with regard to AI in education. And so on the one hand, we have kind of the business world that has rapidly embraced all things AI to make work more efficient. And on the other hand, we have educators that are decrying kind of the death of writing and critical thinking and resisting all things AI. And you know, as it corresponds to classrooms, right? So obviously, we want students to be prepared for life beyond the classroom walls, but we also want to make sure that deep learning is happening within our classrooms. So my big picture question to you is there a way to kind of strike that balance? And I'll let you guys just jump in as you would like.
Sure. So I think I'll jump in here.
Great, thanks.
When this really kind of exploded onto the scene, there was an initial study out of MIT that was looking at productivity. And I think some of the discussion around that study was interesting in that it was saying, you know, look, here's evidence that this is going to be really effective. And in fact, there was a kind of a thought leader who had put out a blog on that particular study that said, that this is showing promise for education. And we got into a debate pretty quickly about, well, there's a difference between productivity and learning, right? And so I think that's partly why you see some of this tension or these differences, that using something to be productive, especially if that means efficient, like getting things done quickly, is different from learning. And so it sparks this whole discussion, right, about how learning requires effort, right? There's some sort of cognitive engagement that's involved there, and that cognitive effort has to be present in order for learning to happen. And so, I think rightly there was some concern over how much is this really going to disrupt, somebody's engagement with content that they actually need to be learning. But in terms of striking a balance, I think, I really appreciate, Jeannie, how you phrase that question, because I do think that this is about balance between those two things, that, we're not just there to teach our students, the content or concepts or things like that we're going over. But part of what we're really trying to teach our students is how to make decisions about things, especially technologies, in their lives, right? In their work and in their personal lives, in their learning. And so I think the way to strike that balance is to say, okay, let's talk about when might you use that in learning, and when might that interfere with your learning, and how do you make good choices about when to use a technology like this or even other technologies throughout your life or throughout your career. So I think striking that balance in part is that we don't just ban it outright, because that doesn't really allow students the opportunity to develop their decision-making capacity around these tools. Rather, I think bringing that in and saying, okay, my job isn't, again, not just to teach you content, but to help you develop that decision-making capacity. And I want you to think through this tool. And we can even turn that into conversations. I mean, that's what I do in my class. We make this an entire conversation around, okay, when would it make sense for you to use this in learning? When would it actually interfere with your learning? How are you going to choose? How do you know? And so I want students to start developing that sort of decision-making capacity around it.
That's excellent. Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to add anything there?
Well, I think the teachers who want to ban it outright, perhaps, or to ignore it or not use it, this is a little different to me from a lot of other technologies in just the sheer way and how it's become embedded in everything so quickly. So if they, it's going to be in the word processes that they're using. It's going to be in the research tools that they might be using. So really talking to the students about those choices, like when should I use this, or how should I use it? How should I interpret what it's giving me? And for the K-12 students, but also the K-12 teachers who, when we have these tools that might create a lesson plan, you know, what do we use it for? Maybe we use it for some creativity, for some brainstorming. And how much do we have to really critically look at what it's giving us? And, does it says it matches the standards you gave it. Does it really?
Mhm.
Those sorts of things.
Chuck, I think you raised such a great example, though. I'm constantly thinking about an instance where my son sent me a snap picture. So he's an undergrad, and his professor had said you cannot use AI in class. And they had a take-home test that was in Word, and he sent me this picture he took of his screen where he's typing in his response, and Word has all of this autofill, right? Ready to kind of
Yeah.
put all of this in. And so he screenshots it and he sends it to me and he says, "Am I cheating?"
Right.
And I was like, that's just such a perfect encapsulation of exactly the situations or scenarios that all of our students have to navigate now, because you can't really cut it out right now. I mean, now it's even in Excel
Mhm.
with caveats. It's in PowerPoint, it's in Google Classroom. Like there's
Mhm.
just so many of the tools that have it embedded. And so they're going to encounter it, and there's not really a way for them to turn it off and not have it be a feature of that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, we were talking about even the Department of Education is using AI and put on their website how they're using it, right? So part of it is that transparency on how you're using it. But even they're saying that they're using it for coding and for text generation and data analysis, right? And so should we be holding students to and teachers to the same standards, and them being allowed to use some of these things, that should there be kind of a standardized approach to how this is handled in districts, or is it better kind of left to the individual educator? Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I think standardization, yes, with the usual caveats that you have to allow people to make the exceptions that are appropriate to their disciplines and what they're teaching in their age groups. I really like to think of it as a curriculum issue, so that you start with the basics and you build from there. And so what you will be able to do with high school seniors this year is you will be able to do more with high school seniors next year than you were this year, simply because the 11th graders would know more when they started high school. And I think that we will see that too as our students sort of move through first grade. I mean, and we have our seniors this year at Winthrop will not know a year, or they have had access to AI tools every year of their college. And that's just reality, just sort of where we are. I do think that we're just going to have to accept that there may be new ways of knowing and new ways of getting to knowing. And I think that particularly for educators and teachers who are used to teaching things one particular way, or having their students learn about a particular concept issue in one particular way, that they're just going to be a lot more ways for people to get there.
Really interesting. That's an interesting way of looking at new ways of knowing. Cool.
I do think there's some equity issues also.
Okay.
If districts, sort of take this road that we're not going to use that. There are people who are going to use it. There are students who will have resources within their families to use the best tools.
Right.
There'll be students who maybe don't have access to use any of those tools. So given that these AI tools now are so embedded into many different services, hardware platforms, and things like that, I think it's important for schools to maybe not standardize on a particular tool, but if they have something they can offer to everyone, so that we don't have this have and have not situation with knowing how these things work, what do they produce? Those sort of issues, I think, are important to consider when we're looking at schools and what families have access to.
That's interesting. Kind of thinking of a new way of looking at the technological divide, right? That is, and what role schools play in kind of leveling that playing field. Okay, I could see that, and some of the cultural capital that is behind the AI. What do you recommend for leaders who are cautious, right, and wanting to really ensure the responsible and secure usage of AI? What do you think that superintendents should be communicating to principals, for example, or principals to teachers, to kind of provide more clarity around AI usage?
I think one thing is just the difference between a consumer tool versus an enterprise tool. So we may use Gmail for our personal email, but our universities and our schools, they have record keeping responsibilities and privacy and security concerns. And so they go with a vendor to provide an enterprise solution to that. And with a lot of these AI tools, if you don't have an enterprise version of it, that you just lose access to things like your right to privacy and the ability to prevent the backflow of your information into the AI system becomes a concern. Chuck and Stephanie, are you familiar with AI Trust You, the Google Doc add-on
I haven't
or
seen that one, Marshall.
extension? I would really recommend that people take a look at it. The Laguna Beach Unified School District in California worked with, was it Stanford, Stephanie? I suppose it, with the university. But basically, the idea was that in the age of AI, teachers and students felt like there was this issue of trust, that students felt like the teachers that the teachers were thinking everything they wrote was done with AI, and the students felt like the teachers are always trying to see if I used AI or are going to accuse me I'm using AI, even if I didn't. So what this Google Doc extension does is it puts in the menu for a teacher to say, I will allow these uses of AI. And then when the student turns in whatever it is, they would also have a menu that says, this is the way I used AI in my assignment. And the idea is to sort of try to build trust or sort of improve that trust among teachers and students in this sort of new world of AI tools.
That's really interesting. Is that anything, like, is that a published report? If you could send that to me, I'd love to put it on our website for folks to look at.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you raised such a great aspect to consider. So policies can, of course, take on very different forms, right? And or directives from a superintendent can wax very different. And I think, you know, where we really start to run into some significant challenges is if a policy is very compliance oriented, you know, you should do this or you should not do that, versus policies where somebody's really trying to think about what's the kind of environment that we want to create and how's this policy going to help construct that environment. You know, trust is, this topic comes up like again and again and again. In fact, we're making this like a central topic that we're exploring. You know, how do we facilitate trust? What does trust look like within the technology itself? How does that affect, you know, relationships between humans, between the human and the technology? But if you take more of this trust sort of orientation to how you craft policies, that means you're stopping to think about how is this really going to influence those relationships in the classroom, and what do we want that influence to look like? And that's separate over and above from framing this as, instead of, again, kind of a yes, no compliance sort of approach, viewing it as like through the lens of literacy or fluency, which of course has become a very common approach to this too. Of, well, what does it mean for us to help our teachers develop literacy or even fluency in this? And same thing for the students, like how are we going to help them develop their literacy or fluency? So these are all kind of different framings, right, that a superintendent could take. And I think across the three of us, I mean, I know Marshall and Chuck really well, you know, we're going to tend more towards those policies, right, that are really underscoring how do you build and facilitate trust in that learning environment? What is it that people know and or need to know in order to make good decisions or use this effectively as part of that? You know, so I think those are different ways that you can frame that sort of policy work that you're doing.
Excellent. Thank you.
One change I've seen with that is when I started teaching classes, the kind of in the graduate program I'm in now, which has been for about 16 years, one of the topics I would discuss with my students who are K-12 teachers, a lot of them are wanting to become like school or district leaders in technology. And some of the things we would talk about would be kind of the standard school acceptable use policy.
Mm.
I think everybody's seen these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And what's been interesting, I think, maybe in the last few years, is some people are shifting from acceptable use policies to responsible use policies. And it's maybe a play on words, but the acceptable use has a lot of can't do, don't do, don't do. Responsible use has some of that, but also has what you can do. You know, this is a responsible use. And I think that framing is a little bit more positive and helps people understand what they can do.
Yeah,
Just
that's excellent.
a very granular thing for superintendents to understand is that if your district has relied on plagiarism detectors, they've probably been pretty successful. AI detectors are nowhere near as accurate as plagiarism detectors. So
Okay.
I would just avoid ever bringing a charge against a student
Mhm.
based solely on an AI detector, because the false positives are just off the charts.
That's a good point. Thank you for saying that. Any other things that you think that superintendents should be communicating to principals, or principals should be communicating to teachers with regards to kind of responsible or secure usage?
Well, I think the other thing that came to mind when you asked about that is, again, the three of us all kind of look at technology integration and diffusion. And I think
Yeah.
for us anyway, that kind of gives us a different perspective that
Yeah.
that makes a blanket policy like for teacher use very difficult. We know that folks are going to be really all along a continuum in how they're using new technologies, and you're going to have, teachers who for whom this technology is very uncomfortable. They're, using it in the classroom is not going to be second nature or of interest. And then you've also got others who are really going to love the whole exploration and innovation that this invites. And so, I would definitely be thinking about how do I support individuals who are going to be at different stages of their relationship with this technology, so that you're not, forcing people to do something that they are very uncomfortable with, but also simultaneously not stifling potentially really interesting and creative ideas coming from your teachers. And so, again, it goes back to how are you framing and crafting that policy or that guidance that you're giving folks. And I think I would tend to put an emphasis on how can that guidance really nourish or nurture those who are going to go out and experiment, and probably be the ones to come up with some really cool solutions that you can then diffuse that out, but also make it clear that for those who don't feel comfortable, or this is not really something that they're ready to integrate into their teaching, that's not expected of them. That's okay. And you mentioned something like transparency. I think even coming back to some of those just core values of like, okay, we want students to be transparent. Let's be transparent about that as well. How do we destigmatize when people do use that? Because it is heavily stigmatized right now. Students and faculty alike. In fact, there was a survey, gosh, I'll have to hunt this down for you. But it was a perception actually in the workplace that if you were using AI, that you weren't as knowledgeable. And then that also went doubly for if you were a woman using AI, or if you were a person of color using AI, that it held these negative connotations. And so, if for anybody who's wanting to explore and test and tinker with it, they may actually be experiencing some pretty negative perceptions around their use of it. So I would be thinking about, right, how do we create this culture of like exploration and innovation, while also not trying to just drag some people along who may not feel ready.
I think too, Stephanie, not wanting to stifle the creativity and the exploration, but I still encounter a lot of teachers who don't understand that these tools that seem to be free,
Right.
they don't cost dollars, but you need to be careful about what kind of access, what kind of data you're putting into these things.
Yeah.
So from a superintendent standpoint, who to me, one of their responsibilities is like averting risk for the school system.
Right.
There needs to be some good professional development for the teachers. Not that you can't use these tools, but what do we not want to put into these tools
Right.
that might
Right.
flow out of the district?
And that's what I think what Marshall was talking about, right? With the enterprise solutions versus kind of the free versions of things, and protecting you a little bit more, right?
Right. And the other thing is a lot of these AI companies are now releasing the ability to tie your personal files, your Google Drive, to your ChatGPT account. And the advantage of that is that it knows what what you've written, what your voice is, what your policies are, and it can use those in the responses that it gives to you. except that nobody has any idea whether or not what they're going to do with this data. And it's one thing for me to connect my personal files, which I would not do, and I would not recommend that you do. But if you connect a shared drive that belongs to a district, and I mean, you're going to be in violation of FERPA and HIPAA and a whole bunch of regulations I don't even know about, likely.
Right.
That's what I was thinking about with some like legal and liability concerns. I think to your point, Chuck, about averting risk for the district, kind of having some of those guidelines in place, particularly for employees on responsible usage. Not the what you shouldn't do, but what you should do. Let's do this instead. I think makes a lot of sense. Anything else you guys want to add there? It's a great conversation.
Well, it's sort of opening Pandora's box on the ethical and legal aspects. So,
Sure.
it's hard not to just kind of jump right into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as somebody who's worked on ethics and ed tech for a long time now, over 2 decades, like our discourse on that and how we fold that into policy making or whatever has been extraordinarily thin and underdeveloped. And I think I'm excited to suddenly see that we've had this explosion of thinking about what are the ethical aspects of these choices. I think that what I've been seeing in the popular discourse is a lot of emphasis on all of the potential harms, and there's also potential benefits, right? And that's really what ethics are about. It's like, what are the benefits to our students? What are the potential harms? And how do we navigate all of that? And so I think starting to create a map of like, what are those potential harms? And also, what are the potential benefits to your students? And how is that going to guide or shape your policies or your decision or what you choose to purchase? But I mean, there are laundry lists of issues out there, all the way from data rights and privacy to accessibility, to issues with the data itself being, inherently biased or discriminatory. So there's a really, really long list of that. And that's before we even get into issues of like what most people are talking about with integrity, or trust in that relationship. And then in some degrees, we've also been talking here about student agency and autonomy. And that, to me, that's something that's more on that positive end of that scale, right? Like, how are we supporting or enabling our students' ability to actually act as moral agents themselves and make decisions for themselves? And how do we help them develop that or help teachers develop that as well? So
Yeah.
I think sitting down and starting to kind of create a map of what these issues are, and certainly having conversations, like bringing people into the fold. The more that these things are communally discussed and deliberated and developed internally, I think the more it's going to really fit your district and what your district wants to focus on. And it's also going to share that decision making with others. But, going right back to Marshall's point, there's a lot to consider, like even with Google Classroom, which is a widely used tool. There's still a lot of things to think about there. Students' data that's not necessarily an AI, right? But every time a teacher chooses Google Classroom or Dojo or, any Class Dojo or anything like that, you are sharing that student's information. So I think helping to attune teachers more and more to not just the ethical aspects of AI in particular, but that this relates to all technology that they choose to use is a really critical pivot in our practice with the use of technologies in education.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for tying that all together. I think anybody else want to comment on professional development for teachers in terms of integrating this technology, or if you want to broaden it out like Stephanie has as well. Either way.
I always get a little bit frustrated when people latch onto particular tools. I understand a district might be a Google district, or a district might be, a Microsoft 365 district or something like that.
Sure.
But a lot of the professional development to me ends up being driven by the particular tool rather than focusing on applications, problems, how is this tool going to make my life better? So I would rather see somebody talking about, um, you know, how to integrate kind of AI features in general or tool features in general, and how those
Right.
can apply to particular standards, particular skills you want students to have, instead of saying at the end of this, all you teachers will be certified in Google Classroom.
Right. Or
It's
this one, yeah.
we don't give people a driver's license to drive a Toyota. They need to have general skills to drive an array of vehicles.
It's a good
I,
analogy.
I do think that to me, that gets to one of the things that I don't have an answer for this, but one of the things that really concerns me is that becoming AI literate will become something that is on that teachers have to do on top of everything else they have to do without any extra support, with any extra time. If this really is a clarion call, if this is this moment in history and this technology is going to revolutionize everything, and we should all be cognizant of that and prepared for that, let's treat it like that. Let's 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 pay teachers to learn about it. Let's give them the time and the resources that they need to do this. Because if we don't do that, then really just kind of shame on us for asking teachers to do this on top of everything else that they do. And I may be biased in that because I work with a lot of K-12 educators, and I'm married to a K-12 educator. So so I will get off of that soapbox.
So, Marshall, there was a Brookings Institute report about a year ago, and they were looking at the workforce and AI and different industries that would be disrupted or things by AI. And education was on that list, but it was listed as, AI is going to maybe augment teaching and actually save teachers time with various tasks that they might be doing, which I find interesting because this summer, maybe 8 or 9 months after that report came out, um, there was a pretty interesting research study that looked at teachers in Australia and Sweden and how AI was actually increasing the workload for
Oh
expert
no.
teachers because they spend a lot of time assessing what the AI is giving them, fixing what the AI has given them. And, you know, I'm sure there'll be this transition period where, we didn't have AI. Now we have AI. We have to adjust to its use. But it was a pretty compelling study that this is causing them work now because they have to make sure it's okay. They have to make sure it's appropriate.
At the risk of getting into weeds we don't want to get into, that is the history of technology is littered with examples of that, where
Exactly.
time-saving technologies end up costing us more time.
Yeah.
Um, I'm reading a book now by Karen Howell on Empire of AI, and the example she uses is the cotton gin. Is that the cotton gin certainly saved time in processing cotton to market, but it certainly made the people providing the content to the cotton gin work a heck of a lot harder.
Interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's a challenge with this is right now we're still in very early stages really of getting evidence. Like there's a lot of claims about it could do this or it could do that. Even in terms of like the cognitive effort, right? It could disrupt that, but we don't know. We don't really have a lot of great evidence to that yet. But on the productivity question, like that just kind of came in as this default assumption. And yet we're getting some pretty early reports. There's another one on programmers using it for coding, and that they were finding that no, actually it made them a lot less productive because same reason they were having to go back and clean up so much just junk code that a lot of them that were doing like what's called vibe coding, they were like, nah, this really isn't working in my workflow. It's disrupting it more than it's helping it. So I think we're still waiting to get a lot of, clear evidence at this stage that's going to give us some good guidance. although we're getting some interesting hints that, to me at least suggests it's good to pause and question those assumptions, or, anytime you find yourself saying, AI can do this or it could do that, just remember that's a hypothesis still.
Right. That critical thinking on all
Yeah.
of this is
Yeah.
important. Good. Well, let's say I'm a superintendent who is all about the AI train. I'm on it and I want to embrace this innovative technology and encourage everyone in my district to also embrace it. I'm not saying that's where I am, but I'm going to play that devil's advocate because we've talked a lot about kind of risk and concerns. But what if I want to embrace that innovative side? Do you have some guidelines or recommendations for how districts do that? And maybe it's
There's
not a how question. Maybe it's a whether or when or that sort of thing.
there's a podcast that I listen to regularly, and it's called Helpfully the Artificial Intelligence Show. And it is the people who do it were originally marketing people, but they've really become sort of AI education people. And
Okay.
one of the things that they recommend is it's a company called SmarterX, not associated with Elon Musk's X, but just they were SmarterX
Different
before
X.
it was XAI. But anyway, they recommend the creation of an AI council, and that's a group of people at the organization level who will who can advise on who can advise on the implementation of AI policy. Now, this doesn't necessarily only include AI experts. As a matter of fact, you don't want only AI experts on that council. You want people who represent all parts of your system. You want teachers, you want community members, you want parents, you want people who can talk about what might this, if we do this, what kind of impact might it have downstream. And so the creation of that council can help to. I strongly encourage a move like that, just to help people get a system-wide perspective on what we're going to do with AI.
So, Jeannie, of course, everything Marshall's saying is great advice.
Yep.
And Stephanie too. They're just so smart. My advice to that superintendent who's all over AI, who really wants to do it, the first thing that I would advise, and I've spent a lot of time in schools. Let's not have the top-down mandate. The teachers are going to reject that. So you're all excited about it. The superintendent's all excited about it. Let's start with some pilot programs. Let people get in there who are really excited about it and innovate. And teachers learn really well from other teachers. So if we can give those pilot programs and get a few kind of cheerleaders or local experts who can help spread the good news, that is, in my experience, in my opinion, is going to go a lot better than forcing this down everybody's throats.
Yeah. I always love how Chuck frames everything.
That's well said.
Way
Yep.
to say it. Yeah, because I think I was going to say pretty much the same thing, that I think the best approaches that I've seen are when leaders are trying to create like a sandbox sort of environment, right? Like, this is the playground we're going to play on, and I'm going to try and give you what you need in order to play in this, and we're going to try and learn from that. And so even how do we create like this marketplace of ideas among those who want to get in and tinker with this? And so even turning that into not just, here's a tool, hamana, God bless, but how do you really say, let's curate your learning from that, right? Like every year, let's come back and I want you to share out what it is that you're learning from this, and what's the advice that you would give your fellow teachers on that. And so that's how you start to build that community of knowledge and practice around that. And even using terms like sandbox or, experiment lab or something like that is just such a great way to frame it, right? It's not, I'm going to make you do this. We're just going to experiment. We're going to explore this, see what we come up with. And I want to create this space that's really creative and open for those who want to jump into it.
All right, I'm going to flip to the other side now, and confuse everyone for a minute, but flip to the other side and say, okay, now I am that superintendent. And this actually came from one of the forums I was having with superintendents recently, where somebody mentioned that in another district, a district employee was caught having used AI to help them finesse a letter that then went out to I don't know who, a bunch of people, but was caught and then fired, lost his job, right? Right. So let's say I'm the superintendent on the other end of this spectrum, where my thought is everything AI is bad and cheating and problematic, and we will not have it. Any thoughts or advice for that side?
I really think first and foremost, you've got to have legal counsel involved on this because, I mean, Marshall mentioned this earlier, right? Whether it's firing a staff member or accusing a student of plagiarism, anything that's going to be consequential for an individual. You've got to bring in legal counsel on that and figure out what you can actually do and devise your policies accordingly because if you're kind of shooting from the hip on that and you're like, well, if somebody's using it and I'm going to fire them, I think you've got to make sure that you're in a really defensible spot on that decision. Same thing with just declaring that use of AI translates into plagiarism. That's one of those things that I think is easily litigable from different angles. And I'm no lawyer and none of us here are lawyers, but that's that we're seeing cases where students are coming at it from different sides, or parents are, if their students are caught in this and saying, wait a minute, you can't, like Marshall said, the plagiarism checkers on AI, there's no reliability on that. So if you've got a policy that you're going to give a student an F or a suspension or something like that based on that, I don't know, that's pretty shaky ground. So first and foremost, I think you've got to bring in some legal counsel to advise you on any instance where you think you're going to be making those kinds of consequential decisions.
All right, good. And so we've weighed kind of multiple sides of this integration of AI into education and into districts. Let's say I am ready to get started, but I don't really, I want to craft a policy. You've convinced me that these are the things I need to weigh. Are there some guidelines you can point to, or, it feels like it's sticky to try to craft policy around something that's we're so new in, it's still unfolding and emerging. A lot of us don't understand well. Where's the best place to start? And what do you think the end goal should be in your view?
I'm always surprised at how many people who want to create policies or manuals, things from scratch.
From scratch.
So, we have places like ISTE. We have the State Educational Technology Directors Association. We have these professional bodies who are going to have guidance documents to help you develop policies.
What's ISTE? Tell me that one.
It's ISTE. It's the International Society for Technology and Education, I believe.
All right. Great.
They actually have, I mentioned earlier, responsible use policy. They have some information about how to construct a responsible use policy. So you don't have to do this on your own. Sure, it's nice to have something that's created for your particular context.
Yeah.
But you don't have to start from scratch, and not everybody's really good at that kind of thing. Have various stakeholders involved. We used in the state of Georgia, every district used to have a technology plan for their schools, and it was all involved around the E-rate funding from the federal government and things. And those committees that created the technology plans usually had some parents, they usually had some teachers, they had some administrators. And So, let's look at all the stakeholders. Let's look at some good examples from other places. Let's look at professional associations who've spent some time on these things and not just think you can, whip up a policy.
I do like guidelines at this point more than I like policy.
Okay.
And I think it's absolutely fine to provide guidelines at this point instead of instead of policies. But I also would just advocate that you keep those as nobody's got time for a list of 30 guidelines. So let's do 7 guidelines.
Distinct. Good. Do you have some 7 guidelines on
Well,
hand?
I have a Substack because I'm too lazy to start a podcast.
Okay.
Because everybody's got either a podcast or a Substack. I have a Substack, and I did recently just publish some guidelines for, and they're broken up by everyone, teachers, staff, and administration, and students.
Great. Send that to me and we'll add it to the resources for the superintendents. Thank
I'll
you.
make a podcast out of it.
And
Perfect.
We
these
we
these
went around
tools are-
of the, oh, go ahead, Chuck.
these tools are changing so fast. If you're going to create guidelines or you're going to create a policy, you better plan, especially on this particular topic, to revisit it and see what might need to be changed or might need to be tweaked. I don't really know how often, and I know it's a big undertaking to manage that kind of stuff, but
Sure.
these tools change pretty quick.
Going to be outdated quickly for sure. That makes sense. Good. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to show
No, no.
instead of developing a policy, we put together a joint statement, and kind of to the point that Chuck and Marshall have been making, that multiple people had input into this, right? So, and we talked with our students, like we actually did active conversations with our students, and I'm happy to share that. We just sort of distilled this down to sort of a way of thinking about this, that it starts off with, we think it can be a learning partner. There are also genuine ethical concerns, but it's also clear how this is changing our workplace and our world. And so our goal is to invite students in to think, to be thoughtful about their work. And so instead of taking a more specific, kind of hard-coded route to this, we generated a set of like principles that, and Chuck, I think this gets to kind of your point, that it's been stable across any of these changes or developments so far, but really focusing on, how is this supporting you or not supporting you in your learning, taking a skeptical approach to it, being inquisitive, being reflective about your use of it, and emphasis on originality and transparency. I think that there are some major themes you can begin to land on if you're going to craft something that says, these are the values or the principles or the ideas that are really essential to us, and regardless of what specific version of ChatGPT comes out next or whatever, these are the things that are really going to be stable across what we want to emphasize in our learning environment. So, and I'm happy to send that along to you. And
Please do. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good. Well, we'll have a nice little set. Like we said, going to keep it small and bite-sized, but a nice little set of guidelines and resources and principles. I think that sounds really good. Thank you, guys. So what haven't I asked you that you want K through 12 administrators to know about AI?
I think one thing we haven't touched on, and to me, this is so interesting, because for so long everybody ignored the ethics stuff. Now that's kind of all the discussion. But
yeah.
I do think that there's a component here that we've brushed up against that's worth being more explicit about. That
okay.
I tend to observe a lot of profound misconception about what technology is, what it does, how it functions, and some of that is just sort of basic. And like I had a colleague who said, "Hey, have you ever used it to search thus and such database?" And the way that they were using it was more like a search tool, without really realizing, this is a large language model. And when you're using a large language, it's a language prediction tool, right? It's trying to guess what word comes next. It's not really going out and truly searching sources in the way that like a Google search comes back. And so I do think that there's a real need to build some basic technical knowledge around what is this, especially AI. That's a very broad, encompassing term. It can mean a lot of different things. We've had a lot of research and interesting tools for years that use intelligent tutors as part of them, or that have adaptive systems where it's detecting, this is what a student's need is, and that can be really effective. And so I think developing some of that vocabulary along with technical knowledge of like, this is what this technology really is and what it does and doesn't do is helpful. And one of the best resources I like on that, I don't have the book near me, I think I took it into the office, is it's just called AI Snake Oil. And
Okay.
despite the title, it's not really this tirade against AI. It's two computer scientists from Princeton explaining different types of AI. And every time I have a student like come to me, or a colleague who says thus and such, I'm like, go read this book. And I think it'll help you understand different types of AI. And invariably they come back and they're like, oh, that was really helpful in starting to understand, okay, this is what it does and this is what it doesn't do. In fact, I think that's their subtitle on that book. But just some of that basic technology, I would really encourage superintendents to try and invest in some PD that helps people develop that vocabulary and that familiarity.
That's good. As you were talking about it, I was thinking I'd take that course, and then you said all I have to do is read a book, and I was like, oh, even easier. That's better. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good. Anybody else?
Marshall mentioned earlier, I made some comment. He was like, well, that's actually the history of technology in our field. And I think with all of these technologies, whether it was an iPad 12 years ago or a laptop 20 years ago, AI now, it's never about its existence in a classroom. It's always about the intentional design of how it's used and integrated and what type of problem or learning outcome you're focusing it around.
Mm-hmm.
So a superintendent who says, we're all going to go in on AI, if there's not an intentional plan, if teachers aren't given the time to properly design how it will be used to solve instructional problems or help students achieve learning outcomes, it's useless.
Yeah, good. Good. So, guys, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to give you each a chance to drill home kind of a final take-home message, if you have one, right? If there's something that you want to make sure that superintendents who are crafting a policy or some guidelines or some principles around AI, there's kind of one thing you want to make sure that they take away from this conversation. What would you like to tell them?
You can't make policy or guidelines knowing nothing. You can make policies and guidelines without knowing everything.
Good. Anybody else?
I would just underscore that you don't have to do it alone, and also you probably can't do it alone. That we've used different terms here of like having a council or bringing in stakeholders or otherwise involving folks in helping to make decisions and set a direction around that creating a community around this so that you can deliberate it and then devise what you think is going to be the desirable direction is key.
All right, good. Thank you, guys. So I wanted to thank you for joining us on the webinar. These webinars are posted on demand on our website under the resources tab. It's golearntoday.org. So that'll be ready here soon, and it'll live up there for at least the year so that superintendents can access the information that they need when they need it. So thank you, guys. I appreciate you.